For the purposes of introduction, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Brian Birch, and I am the president and co-founder of CatholicVote.org. I suppose you probably all know me mostly by my email address, which you likely receive a lot of emails from me, but it actually is a true honor and a privilege to be able to meet so many of you in person, particularly some of our longtime allies, subscribers, people that have been with us from the beginning, including my family who is with me here tonight. So thank you all for coming. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to ask God's blessing on our event tonight, to bless our food, our nation, and each of you here and your family. So please join me in this prayer taken from Psalm 67 from today's Office of Readings. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. O God, be gracious and bless us, and let your face shed its light upon us. So will your ways be known upon earth, and all nations learn your saving help. Let the nations be glad and exult, for you rule the world with justice. With fairness you rule the peoples, you guide the nations on earth. The earth has yielded its fruit, for God, our God, has blessed us. May God still give us his blessing, till the ends of the earth revere him. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. So again, welcome. Thank you all for being here in this wonderful venue. Those of you who live here and are lucky enough to live here, God bless your weather. And I won't mention the other things. For those of you less familiar with Catholic Vote, and I know there's many of you here who are becoming acquainted with our organization for the first time, I hope tonight will be a fitting introduction. As our name implies, we are Catholic, and unapologetically so. We love the Church and all of its teachings. And most importantly, we believe the Church has some very important insights that have influenced and profoundly shaped the history of our country, and that these insights remain critically important today for our country, and they are worth fighting for. Our job as Catholics is to witness to the truth, and to all of the truths taught by our faith, and to evangelize our fellow Catholics and all the world, and together as our Church, help influence public life in America. So what do we do? First and foremost, we organize Catholics. Lots of them. We now count nearly 600,000 members of Catholic Vote across the country. Our members help distribute critical information in parishes, in neighborhoods, in workplaces, and most importantly, through their social networks where the battle for information and truth rages every day. As you likely know, we Catholics in our big church are a diverse bunch. In fact, we are so diverse that we often split our vote in such a dramatic fashion that the outcomes of many of our elections are often decided by how the Catholics vote. Because we are a lay organization, we also endorse candidates for office. We call for the election and defeat of candidates based on their policy positions weighed against the guidance and wisdom of the Church. Or as a prominent bishop once told me, he paints the dots and we help connect them. We also engage in litigation. We handpick and fund legal cases across the country designed to transform our laws. As an example, we are currently fighting several legal cases, including one here in your county, involving the abuse of women used as surrogates, paid to carry and birth a child before they are discarded. We also have a separate legal case working its way through the 10th Circuit that we don't talk a lot about because of its huge significance and the opposition. but is now cited by legal experts as the single biggest threat to Roe v. Wade working its way through the judicial pipeline and is expected to make its way to the Supreme Court sometime next year. And finally, given the importance of the courts, this year we are focusing our energies in a major way on winning a pro-life majority in the United States Senate. Starting to feel like this is a State of the Union address. I didn't realize there's applause lines. Which brings me to one of the most important and primary reasons why we organized this event here tonight. I don't need to tell you or convince you of the importance of the courts, and therefore the importance of judges. In fact, the legacy of any president is often shaped by their impact on the courts, especially the Supreme Court. Think about this. What issue of any significance over the last 50 years was decided by anyone other than judges and the courts? The sanctity of life, marriage, rights to religious liberty, civil rights, prayer and school, even property rights, lately immigration, presidential powers, and yes, as we learned in the year 2000, even elections. For good or ill, our courts have become so powerful that perhaps the most important way for people of faith to have impact and to protect our liberties is to influence the selection and confirmation of judges. That process involves the presidency, but it also involves the Senate, not the House of Representatives, where all the focus this year is going to be because of the Republican troubles in the House and the prospect of impeachment, which begins in the House of Representatives. But in the Senate is responsible for judges. And for those keeping track, the current makeup of the United States Senate is 51 Republicans, 49 Democrats. Or, as some would argue, and I would agree with them, based on a number of weak Republicans, the Democrats actually have the advantage in the Senate. Now, consider this. Of the 33 Senate seats currently on the ballot this November, there's a third of the Senate is up for election every 2 years, so 33 seats, 25 of those 33 seats are Democrats defending their seats. And 10 of those 25 seats are states that Donald Trump won, including states that President Trump won by massive margins. States like West Virginia, a current Democratic senator, and a state that Trump won by 42%. Or other red states, Montana, North Dakota, Indiana, Missouri, all states that President Trump won by nearly double digits, in some cases over 20 points, currently has a Democratic senator running for re-election. And in all cases, a pro-abortion senator, and in some cases, a Catholic. So my message to you tonight is simple. If you care about our courts and the impact of judges, given the breadth and scope of their power over the future of our country, pay attention now, especially to the Senate, and what's going to happen this November in the Senate elections. Because the Senate, again, is the branch of government is responsible for confirming new judges. And with a healthy new majority in the Senate and the very real prospect of a Supreme Court vacancy or multiple Supreme Court vacancies, this election, the Senate races in this election, could truly alter the future of our courts and therefore the future of our nation for a generation or more. Catholic Vote is focused on the 5 top Senate races in the country. We know the Catholic voters in these states. We know how to reach them. We've developed an extremely effective proprietary tool where we're able to reach out to them, track their preferences based on digital algorithms and mobile devices. We can tell if these devices are going into church every Sunday, for example, and we message them based on how regularly they attend church. We don't know their names, by the way, but we do know based on device IDs for those of you involved in mobile advertising. But I'm going to need, and we are going to need, your help this November to make sure these Catholic voters know the candidates, know the facts, and make sure they and all of their friends get to the polls. I'm going to provide some more details on that later on, but now let me get to the main event. Having spoken very briefly here about courts and judges, I want to introduce a very good friend, an ally, and attorney here in Orange County, Michael Caspino. He's going to introduce our special guest tonight. Just one second, Mike. Mike's not going to like what I'm about to do. He's not going to like what I'm about to tell you because he's a very humble man. But in addition to his legal work in the business world, Mike is significantly involved in the defense of our church privately. Perhaps unknown to many of you, he was responsible for successfully defending the church from an attempt, I believe in Louisiana, to break the seal of confession. He's advised bishops on legal threats to their right as bishop to hire and fire personnel in their schools based on whether those personnel would adhere to the tenets of our faith. And most recently, you may have heard about this story, he successfully crafted a legal strategy to defeat an avowed Satanist who planned to use a stolen consecrated host in a so-called black mass in Oklahoma. Because of Mike Caspino, the Satanist was legally compelled to forfeit his plans and return the Holy Eucharist to the church. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Caspino.
Stop. I'm a little disappointed with all of you. If you're Catholic, raise your hand. I saw each and every one of you eating before we said grace. All of you. So Father over here, he will hear confessions by the pool. And there's only one of him, so I'm going to help him. And you can come to me and tell me your confession, and I won't say a word unless it's really good. And then I'll come back up here and tell you everybody what you said. Thank you so much for coming. First off, let's give a big hand for the people at the Marriott here. They did an awesome job. Did everybody get enough to eat or what, right? Anybody? There you go. It's good. I am struck by one thing today. Our Jewish brethren, stand up. Stand up. Our Jewish brethren. We're so happy to have you here. We support Israel. We support Jerusalem. We support you in a big way. So I was supposed to get up here and say all kinds of nice things about Ben Shapiro. And all I can say is any guy who's about to get beat up by a 6'5" transvestite is somebody I totally dig. I really like. And you'll see it in a minute. Okay? All I want to say is, look, I really view this guy. First off, when he wants to become Catholic, I will be his RCIA sponsor. I swear. I am going to be his sponsor. I am so happy to have him here. I also want to say thank you to my friend Frank Kavanaugh, who never likes anybody to say thank you, who helped financially bring him here today. Stand up, Frank. He's standing, but he's really short. All the people who helped financially bring him here today. It really is a beautiful thing about the relationship between our Jewish brethren and us as Catholics. At the end of the world, someday it's going to be us and them. That's going to be it. And it's just an amazing thing. Sorry to say that, but maybe also our LDS friends will be behind us too. But I just want to say something. I want to start a video right now, and he's going to come out here. You know, they do that, like, you know, Michael Jackson, big video thing, and everybody comes out here and all that. But let's give a warm round of applause for our good friend, Ben Shapiro.
doesn't really comport with the First Amendment. I don't care. I don't think that's a relevant document right now. You have to be a Boy Scout. Nobody named Boy Scouts. You have to be uneducated youths. We love guns to protect life, liberty, and property. They love guns to put them in our face and take those things away from us. This is a group of people who graduated with degrees in lesbian dance theory and then were surprised when they didn't get a six-figure paycheck out of college. I'm here, I'm reading, give me crap. Toughen up, you spoiled brat snowflakes, if you actually want a better world. Forget about the disrespect, facts don't care about your feelings. If we're taking our policy prescriptions from kids who can't spell either policy or prescription, we have a problem. I will go to jail, I will pick up guns, or the government of the United States tells me I'm supposed to violate my religious precepts.
How dare you accuse me of standing on the graves of children that died? How dare you?
I've seen you do it repeatedly.
Like I say, how dare you?
I mean, you can keep saying that, but he's done it repeatedly. All you're showing everybody is that your collective IQ of over-channeled intellectuosity might be able to toast a piece of bread like
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome
That's an amazing welcome. I can see that you Catholics take your mid-30s Jews very seriously. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the elections that are coming up and why, obviously, it's important that everybody be involved. So the elections that are coming up, it was amply summed up before. Democrats are defending 26 seats. Republicans are defending 9. Trump won 10 of those seats. States the Democrats are defending by an average about 15 points. There are a bunch of seats that Republicans should pick up so long as they don't nominate complete idiots, which, fortunately, unlike in Alabama, it seems like they are more likely to do, is nominate some decent candidates. Republicans have a 14-point lead in the generic ballot in West Virginia. They have an 8-point lead in North Dakota versus Heidi Heitkamp. They have a 5-point lead versus Joe Donnelly in Indiana, a 5-point lead in Missouri versus Claire McCaskill, a 5-point lead versus John Tester in Montana. So that is 5 seats right off the bat that Republicans should win if they run their races properly. In the House, obviously, Democrats need to pick up 23 seats. The best available data suggests that it's about a 50-50 shot right now whether the Democrats win the House. Now, that's pretty amazing considering that Donald Trump's approval rating has been hovering between the high 30s and low 40s for virtually all of his presidency, but it is demonstrative of just how terrible Democrats are at legitimately everything. I mean, their campaign this week is apparently Hamas is good, we learned. And we learned that that MS-13, rather, are not animals. We learned that, so that's good. And we have learned that the NRA are terrorists. So if you are a member of the NRA, you're a terrorist. If you're Hamas, you're innocent. And if you're a member of MS-13, you're a perfectly decent human being who is not, in fact, an animal. This is what we've learned from the Democrats this week. If they want to run on that, more power to them. Enjoy. One of the things that's happened with President Trump is that President Trump's election has driven them completely mad and driven them completely off the rails. So I think a lot of folks were duly surprised by President Trump's election. I know that I was. I lost a lot of money over it in bets. But, but what's happened with the Democrats is they've started nominating the most extreme candidates they can find in primaries. And it's having a pretty significant impact, or could at least have a pretty significant impact. There were some state elections in Pennsylvania, state primaries in Pennsylvania, and 2 card-carrying members of the Democratic Socialists of America beat state representatives in Democratic primaries with 65% and 68% of the vote, respectively, in Pennsylvania. That's a pretty amazing thing. You're seeing in Seattle that the leadership of the Seattle City Council is now being led by Shama Sawant, who's an open socialist. The movement to the hard left by the Democrats is the worst thing they can do if they actually want to win back the House. Because you see seats like John Ossoff running in Georgia's 8th district. He didn't win because he was seen as a Nancy Pelosi acolyte. The seats they are winning, they're running moderate Democrats. They're not running hardcore left Democrats, but their base want them to run hardcore left Democrats because Donald Trump has made them so insane. His election, even more than the Bush years, it has made them completely bonkers, and now they think that they are going to win back everything simply by shouting at the moon, Bernie Sanders style. So this raises the question, how are the Republicans actually doing? So the truth is the Republicans are doing pretty well overall. I mean, I'm amazed to say that the Trump administration is the most conservatively governing administration of my lifetime, bar none. It is not even a question. The first year and a half of Trump's administration has been incredibly conservative in a variety of ways. On social issues particularly, Republicans are doing pretty well. On judges, as we were hearing, Donald Trump has appointed 39 federal judges, including Justice Gorsuch, 21 judges on circuit courts. This is the highest number of federal judicial appointments for any president at this point in the presidency in American history, ever. On abortion, they've done a little bit less well. They haven't defunded Planned Parenthood. This obviously is a major point of contention in the Senate. Very difficult to do that when you only have 51 seats in the Senate and you have Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins as part of your caucus. That said, obviously the House should have forced them to vote on defunding Planned Parenthood and stood up to the Senate and forcing them to do that. That's their main failure with regard to abortion, but Republicans are moving apparently toward defunding the Title X funding for Planned Parenthood. That's something the administration's about to do. And President Trump, immediately upon entering office, signed the Mexico City policy, so he's done that as well. On religious freedom, President Trump has been excellent. The executive branch has done an excellent job. He has signed an executive order to allow religious institutions to speak about politics openly, which is great, and protected religious institutions like the Little Sisters of the Poor, and signed executive orders to allow businesses that work with the Health and Human Services Department to actually abide by their own religious edicts. So all of this is really good stuff from President Trump. Now, this is going to provide a lot of gas in the tank for religious conservatives to get out there and vote, especially when you look at the other side of the aisle. Because when I say that the Democrats have become incredibly radical, it is particularly on social issues and issues of religious freedom where Democrats have become insanely radical. And this ranges from their belief that government should involve itself in your church, to their belief that your government should involve itself in your schools, to their belief that government should involve itself in how you raise your children. They legitimately believe that it is the job of government to take your children's education away from you and give it to a bunch of leftist social acolytes who believe that the Bible is not the inerrant word of God, but the Bible actually is a deeply evil document that teaches intolerance and hatred. This is what they actually believe about the Bible. And they've made this clear in policy for the last decade at minimum. In 2006, we all remember when Archbishop Sean P. O'Malley and the Catholic Charities of Boston announced they could no longer work to find homes for children, thanks to the state's decision to crack down on institutions for not giving children to same-sex couples. The governor at the time was Mitt Romney. He tried to stop it. Democrats wouldn't work with him to allow the Catholic Charities to continue to do adoptions. This is going to spread across the country if Democrats have their way. On abortion, the government has decided to treat churches as businesses. At least Democrats have decided to do that for purposes of pushing this anti-traditional social agenda. After the passage of Obamacare, the Obama administration decided that it would be mandatory for churches to issue forms to the government notifying the government that churches would not be covering contraceptive care. They wanted to know that so that the government could then step in and provide that contraceptive care. This is the Little Sisters of the Poor case. When the Little Sisters of the Poor said, we won't do that, the Obama administration threatened to fine them $70 million. In that case, the Obama administration actually argued in court, in front of the Supreme Court, that the government should be able to dictate hiring decisions about priests, rabbis, and pastors. And they should actually be able to tell churches who to hire and who not to hire. That they should be able to force Catholic institutions to hire female priests, for example. Or that they should be able to actually force shuls like mine and synagogues like mine to hire a gay rabbi. This was one of the things that the HHS was actually pushing under President Obama. It was an amazing argument. Fortunately, it lost at the Supreme Court level, but there's no doubt that this is where the left wants to go. In June 2016, in California, which of course our state is the worst state in the nation when it comes to this, in June 2016, California Democrats proposed SB 1146 that would have prevented private colleges from quote-unquote discriminating based on gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. There would have been no exception for religious institutions. So they could have forced any religious institution in the state of California to abide by leftist social precepts. This year, Democrats are pushing AB 2943, which is even more insane. That's a bill that would have made it unlawful business practice to engage in a transaction intended to result or that results in the sale or lease of goods or services to any consumer that advertise, offer to engage in, or do engage in sexual orientation change efforts with an individual. That term includes efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions. In other words, if your business, right, or if your religious institution sells a book called the Bible, right, that says that you should not engage in particular behaviors, this could be seen as a violation of California law. It would be unlawful business practice, again, to enter into any transaction that involves an attempt to change somebody's sexual orientation, but that term sexual orientation also includes gender expression. So you have a 4-year-old child, and your 4-year-old child is a boy, and comes to you and says, I believe you are a girl. And you say, no, you're not a girl. Let's take you to a psychologist or a psychiatrist to try and help you wrestle with this issue. this could now be seen as a violation of California law because you are trying to change the quote-unquote sexual orientation of your 4-year-old child. And businesses, obviously, are under assault by Democrats as well. Obamacare regulations attempted to strip the ability for closely held corporations like Hobby Lobby to decide their own health care benefits. And obviously, we all know the cases in Washington of Barronelle Stutzman, right, who was the Christian florist who refused to arrange the flowers at a same-sex wedding. Even though she was perfectly fine with serving the same-sex customer, she just said, I'm not going to participate in the same-sex wedding. And the state of Washington, the ACLU sued her, and the state fined her, and she's now at risk of losing her business, her home, and all of her personal assets. The Klein family in Oregon had the exact same thing with regard to baking things, right? They had Sweet Cakes by Melissa. They're now out of business and maybe bankrupt because lesbians decided to sue them when they would not participate in the same-sex wedding, and the state decided to crack down on them and try and fine them $135,000, plus additional damages for not giving a cake to a same-sex wedding. But no matter, this is what the left believes freedom constitutes, and it's happening in other places too. This happened in New Mexico with a photographer. It happened in Idaho with Christian business people who owned a chapel. It's happening in a wide variety of places around the country. This is something the left wants. The left wants a tyrannical stamping on religious freedom. They believe that your religious freedom violates somebody else's right to utilize your services. They don't have a right to utilize your services. I've always found this argument unbelievably puzzling. I don't know why this even has to do with religious freedom as just opposed to freedom of association. It seems to me that you should be able to allow to serve or not to serve anybody. And if you decide to be a jerk and not serve somebody on the basis of race, well, then we'll drive you out of business with capitalism. Right? The greatest force in the history of mankind for tolerance is not the government. The government was a force for intolerance. The government was the force behind segregation. The greatest force in the history of mankind for curing intolerance it's actually dual. Religion and capitalism are the two greatest forces in the history of mankind for overcoming intolerance among tribal groups. Okay. And then, of course, there's the left's agenda with regard to abortion, which continues to be more and more extreme by the day. Now the left is basically coming out of the woodwork and celebrating abortion. I remember, I'm still a young guy, I'm 34, but I remember when I was 15 or 16 that the slogan among Democrats was safe, legal, and rare. Well, that's no longer the thing they push because maybe they recognize that that formulation made no sense. If it was safe and legal, then why should it be rare? Or why does it matter, right? If it's not morally bad, then why should it be rare in the first place? And so they've decided, okay, well, we'll get rid of that cognitive dissonance. We'll just say safe, legal, and common, right? We should all shout our abortions. This is the new movement, is to shout your abortion, be proud of your abortion. It's a rite of passage to have an abortion. And not only that, you should be very proud if you engage in eugenic abortion. You should be a proud person if you decide that you didn't want that girl or you didn't want that Down syndrome baby, so you killed that baby in the womb. Right? This is going back to the bad old days of the eugenics movements in the early 20th century, when Democrats were forcibly advocating for the killing and sterilization of undesirables. Right? It goes back to Buck v. Bell in 1927 when Oliver Wendell Holmes was saying that sterilization should be utilized on people who are quote-unquote mentally deficient, because 3 generations of imbeciles is enough, so we may as well sterilize them. Well, Democrats are basically back there now, particularly with regard to Down syndrome. Just a few weeks ago, Ruth Marcus wrote in the Washington Post that if she'd been pregnant with a Down syndrome baby, remember she's writing this in one of the biggest newspapers in America, she said that if she'd been pregnant with a Down syndrome baby, she gladly would have killed it in utero. In writing that laws to prevent such abortions were somehow cruel, here's a direct quote, quote, "I can say without hesitation that tragic as it would have been, and ghastly as a second trimester abortion would have been, I would have terminated those pregnancies had the testing come back positive. I would have grieved the loss and moved on. I'm going to be blunt here. That was not a child I wanted. You can call me selfish or worse, but I am in good company." Well, she's not in good company. She's in common company. She'll have a different sort of company later. But it's... But what's amazing about the left's perception about abortion is that they'll say things like it would have been ghastly, right? It would have been tragic. Again, if you think that it's just a polyp, then you don't think it would have been ghastly or tragic. You think that it would have been like the removal of a polyp. I've never mourned for a polyp before. But Democrats seem to have this weird idea that you can mourn for the baby and then say it's not a baby at the same time when it's convenient, which essentially is the same argument that was being made by slaveholders in 1850. With regard to black people, they were saying, well, they're people for purposes of us counting votes. That's why we would like to use them in our population censuses. But they're not people for purposes of us owning them and using them as property. It turns out that dehumanization of other human beings is the worst thing that another human being can do, and the Democrats are engaged in it every single day. So to go back to their formulation this week, Hamas innocent, MS-13 not terrorists, NRA terrorists, and babies bad. Right? Babies don't exist. Okay. Finally, the left is attempting to crack down on our schools, and finally they're attempting to crack down on our homes. You can see it particularly in the schools. This has already happened in places like Britain. In Britain, there's been a serious crackdown on religious institutions that refuse to teach particularly socially approved versions of LGBT politics. There are a couple of yeshivot, Jewish day schools, that are in danger of being shut down in London over this, actually. Well, in California, the state law already mandates the teaching of LGBT history from K through 8 in the public schools. And advocates like James Michael Nichols want children to learn about Harvey Milk and Christine Jorgensen in their classes, teaching third graders about transgenderism and homosexuality. I assume we won't learn the part about how Harvey Milk was actually a pedophile. I guess we'll skip that part in school, but everything else we will learn in our schools. It doesn't stop there. In Massachusetts, a judge has now ruled that a private Catholic school had to be punished for hiring a guy who did not reveal that he was gay, and then it turned out that he was gay, and so they said, we're not going to hire you, and he sued, and he won. Right? It's a Catholic school. Like, did you not understand the rules going in? Right? Of course you understood the rules going in. That was the whole purpose of applying and then suing. And this is all targeted litigation. And the same thing has happened in Georgia, where a gay teacher sued a private Catholic school for firing after he announced his same-sex marriage on Facebook. In Washington State, an administrator did the same thing, even though he had signed a contract agreeing to abide by the Catholic principle, and then allegedly hid his homosexual lifestyle from the school by listing his boyfriend as his roommate. And then when it came out, he was fired, and then he sued the school. And now the Supreme Court, of course, has ruled that same-sex marriage is a right. So the next step is going to be removing nonprofit status for any religious school in the country that does not abide by their dictates on same-sex marriage. Okay, that is exactly what is going to happen next. They're going to say that all of these schools cannot be given IRS nonprofit status, and if you give money to those schools, that will no longer be tax deductible. And then what they'll say is it's not a nonprofit and it doesn't have a religious exemption anymore. It's just a normal LLC, which means that it's subject to discrimination law, which means we'll put you out of business altogether. The reason that I'm saying this with such confidence is because they will use exactly the pattern they used with Bob Jones University. So Bob Jones University is a famous case with regard to the IRS. Bob Jones University had a stupid, idiotic policy about interracial dating. They said interracial dating is banned at Bob Jones University. They had IRS tax-free status. And the IRS, without any legislation to this effect, said, we are removing your nonprofit status because we don't like your interracial dating policy. Well, I didn't like their interracial dating policy either, but that has nothing to do with whether their nonprofit status could be revoked under law simply because the IRS decided that. Well, the IRS decided that this was socially unapproved activity, and therefore, there goes the status. Well, once the state of California has decided that same-sex dating, same-sex marriage are basically akin to interracial dating or interracial marriage, you can see them using exactly that same logic in order to strike down nonprofit status for a bunch of religious schools across the country, which is exactly what's going to happen. They're going to do the same thing with churches as well. They're not really hiding the ball here. I mean, the ones who are most obvious about it will just say this stuff openly. They will just say that they think these religious institutions are discriminatory and that they're violative of basic human rights, and therefore nonprofit status should be revoked. Obviously, in California, Democrats already attempted to remove nonprofit status from youth groups like the Boy Scouts that supposedly were discriminating against gays and lesbians, which is why you've seen the Boy Scouts move dramatically to the left by allowing gay scoutmasters and now by opening the Boy Scouts to girls. So that clip of me saying that the Boy Scouts is not for girls because it's called the Boy Scouts, they went along with me. Actually, they changed their name. They're no longer called the Boy Scouts. They're called the Scouts BSA. So at least they had the brains to recognize you can't call it the Boy Scouts if you have girls. So I'm not completely wrong, but it is demonstrative of how far things have moved. The final step is going to be, it's amazing. What the left always says is, don't worry, if you give us X, there's no way we'll go for more than that. That'll be as far as we go. Right? If you give us civil unions, there is no way we'd go for same-sex marriage. Why would we possibly want same-sex marriage? We have all the tax benefits, we have all the legal benefits. Why would we possibly want same-sex marriage? And they say, well, listen, same-sex marriage ain't going to bother you, right? Doesn't affect your marriage, doesn't affect your church. We're not going to do, you say we're going to come after your churches or your businesses? No way. No, come on, guys. We're not going to do that. And then within 5 minutes of same-sex marriage becoming law, they're coming after the churches and the businesses. So it's not that it's a slippery slope, it's that there is no slope for the left. This was a cliff, and once you stepped off the cliff, there was only one way to go, and it was down. Right? So every institution for religion will be eventually subsumed under the leftist rubric, and that includes your home. Eventually, what they will say is that if you are training at home your children in a particular religious lifestyle, you're abusing your child. This is where this will go. It is already headed this way in Canada. This is where Bill 89 in Ontario, Canada, added gender identity and gender expression to Ontario's Human Rights Code. That followed a bunch of other controversial bills in Canada. Bill 13 compelled public schools to have gay-straight alliances. Bill 77 prohibited certain forms of therapy for minors with gender identity disorder. But under Bill 89, social workers now have to consider the Ontario Human Rights Code, including a child's or young person's sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, which means that when deciding whether parents should be able to adopt, Ontario has been instructed to see what they believe about sexual orientation and gender identity. So if you're a traditionally religious person living in Ontario, and you say, listen, I'm going to teach my child that homosexual activity is a sin, and I'm going to teach my child that if it's a boy, it's a boy, and if it's a girl, it's a girl, then Ontario could theoretically crack down on you or take that child away from you. That's the direction that this is moving. And we actually have started to see this in the United States as well. Earlier this year, there was a case in Hamilton County in Ohio where a judge actually gave custody of a transgender teen to grandparents rather than parents. Why? Because a female 17-year-old wanted to begin hormone treatment to transition into a male. Right? The parents wanted their daughter to seek other sorts of treatment before bodily mutilation, and the courts ruled that the parents were standing in the way of the 17-year-old's desires and handed custody over to the grandparents who were going to allow for all this hormone treatment. The court simply relied on the testimony of doctors. So they went and they got a few doctors, and the doctors said it would be better if this kid had the hormone treatment, and then the court said, okay, so we'll give custody of the kid from the parents to the grandparents so they can get the hormone treatment. Okay, this is the direction in which the left seeks to move. Okay, well, when you draw this dichotomy, it's pretty obvious which way religious people should be leaning politically, okay, because the gap is enormous. But obviously, the last election cycle was very difficult for a lot of people. I didn't vote for either one of the major candidates because neither one of them met my basic standard for humans that should be president of the United States. Now, I understood the arguments that it was a binary election, and I understood that there are basically two views of voting. View number one is that your vote is a ticket that expires the day after the election, so you might as well use it. It's a coupon. It's gone. Use it or lose it. And then there was view number two, which is your vote is an endorsement of the particular candidate that you decide to vote for, and I could not in good conscience vote for Donald Trump, who I thought demonstrated dramatic lack of character. I had three specific worries about President Trump politically. In 2016, two of those three have been alleviated. One of them was that he would not govern conservative because he had said everything on the map. That obviously was not true. He's governed very conservative, and that's wonderful, thank God. Concern number two is that he would soul-suck the Republican Party along the lines of Bannonism or Trumpism, that all of a sudden the Republican Party would see him as a thought leader. That has not happened. Basically, he's become a vessel for conservative policy, which is great. He's been what Grover Norquist promised, right? Grover Norquist said, he'll sit here, you'll send him legislation, he'll sign it. That's essentially what has happened, which is great. He can't be a thought leader because he doesn't have a thought, and I am fine with that. I can totally live with that. And the third thing that I was worried about is that he was personally so toxic that this was going to toxify the Republican brand for future generations. That's the one that's still on the table, right? And this, because, yeah, I know, guys, but his character, okay, here's where I get into the controversial part. So far, it's been a Hosanna crowd, right? Here's the part where I get a little bit controversial. Okay, so Donald Trump's character is not good. Okay, Donald Trump is not a man of character. Donald Trump is a guy who has done a lot of stuff that I like. I'm supremely happy with it. I speak on a regular basis to members of the administration and express that happiness. If the election were held today, I would vote for Donald Trump. Donald Trump, however, and I think it's important to mention this, is not a dude you'd want babysitting your kids. Okay? President Trump is a guy who paid, I mean, do I have to go through the litany? He paid $130,000 to a porn star that he had a one-night stand with to shut her up. He did that. He had that one-night stand with her like a month after his baby was born. Okay, he said that the 1970s were like his personal Vietnam because he was trying to avoid STDs. Okay, he's been accused by a bevy of women of sexual harassment and abuse. Okay, so can we dispense with the idea that he is the kind of guy you'd want leading your prayer service? He is not. Now, does that mean he's a bad president? No, it means he's doing a lot of good things, but he's not a great guy. That's okay. There are lots of people in your life who are like this. You have plumbers, I'm sure, who are like this. Okay, But, I mean, he does all these things. Like, it's so bizarre to me. There are all these people who, he's a King David figure. Have you read any Bible lately? Okay, he is not a King David figure. Okay, and you know whose job it is to decide whether he is a King David figure? It ain't yours. That would be on God. It is God who gets to decide who's the anointed one and who's not the anointed one. It's your job to actually be Nathan the prophet. It's all of our job to be Nathan the prophet and say, are you following the rules or are you not following the rules, right? When he does something that is wrong, it is our job to call him out, and when he does something right, it is our job to praise him. The reason that I mention this is if you don't want that third consideration of mine to actually become a problem, if you don't want to toxify the conservative brand for the next generation, stop telling young people Donald Trump's a wonderful dude. Okay, what you're going to have to do is be a little more honest, which is his policies are great. I like a lot of his policies. But when he says stupid things, or when he does bad things, or when he rips on Heidi Cruz's looks, or when he says that Mika Brzezinski had a facelift, or when he talks about Charlottesville like an idiot, when he does all of those things, you're allowed to say it's bad that he did that. Right? It's okay to be Nathan the prophet. Guess what? King David could take it. King David could take it. He stayed the king. So if you believe he's King David, then you shouldn't be so shy about chiding him when he does something wrong. We should be repeating the Nathan the prophet line, Natan the prophet. Right? We should be saying, why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? And then it's Trump's job to say, okay, I repent, which would be good. But I'm less worried about Donald Trump's. I know. Look, a lot of people in this room are a lot more concerned about Donald Trump's soul than I am. I got to be honest. I don't care all that much. But what I do care about is our souls in the room, and our character in the room, and the perception of our character in the room. Because people judge us in society. This is particularly true of young conservative. You want to see, it's very, you can see it in the room right now. When I say this stuff about President Trump, everyone under the age of 40 is like, yeah, that's true. And a lot of people over the age of 60 are like, no, that's not right. Okay, the reason for that is because people over the age of 60 have looked at the political sphere. They've been here since Clinton. They remember Clinton. They remember having these character battles, and they lost the character battle. Right? They said character mattered. Character, it turned out, did not matter. Clinton remained president. And they said, okay, you know what? If character doesn't matter, then what do you... I'm not going to listen to the media and all these people who are telling me character matters all of a sudden. They don't care about character. They're a bunch of liars. So let's get what we can get while the getting's good. I sympathize. I understand. A lot of young people, however, are having conversations with their friends right now. And those conversations are going something like this. Here's a bunch of our policies. We like our policies. These are really good policies for the country. Really? You're a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. Well, no, I'm not. I'm not a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. You have no evidence I'm a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. Why would you say something like that? Well, you back Donald Trump, and Donald Trump said X, Y, and Z. And if your comeback to that is, he is a man of great character. That conversation is now over because, come on, guys. Okay, so the way to actually walk this line is to be honest. It turns out that honesty can still win you elections. Honesty can still do fine, and Trump can take it. Okay, I know Trump has a thin skin. I know he doesn't like when people rip on his personal life. Well, if he didn't like when people ripped on his personal life, you should have stopped calling the New York Post and bragging about his sex life to the columnists. Like, if you don't want people ripping on your personal life, don't have an affair with wife number one, with wife number two while you're married to wife number one, and don't have an affair with wife number three while you're married to wife number two. I consider it our great good fortune Stormy Daniels is not our current first lady. But all of these things can be true, and we can still like what President Trump is doing. And this is why, in the end, the policy does matter. The reason I'm making this argument is because I want to preserve the possibility that young people don't see us as a bunch of hypocrites. That we take our religion seriously enough to say, I don't like X, but overall, I'm going to vote for the guy. Overall, our agenda matters more. I'm not going to become a Democrat just because I don't like Donald Trump's sex life. I'm not going to start backing on-demand abortion just because I think that Donald Trump is gross with women. Like, that logic does not follow at all. So what I'm saying for religious folks, and this is true, I think, for conservatives in general, is that honesty is the best policy. Because the left wants to talk about all these character issues. The only way to take the character issue off the table is to say, the man has character defect. Now, can we talk about the things that actually matter? Because he doesn't matter all that much as a human. Okay. Donald Trump is a vessel for policy. Donald Trump is a vessel for what we want to do, just as all politicians are vessels for what we want them to do. He can be a good vessel or he can be a bad vessel. But describing the vessel inaccurately is a way to alienate a bunch of people who are trying to figure out which policies to support. So when it comes to this election cycle, yes, obviously, we all have to give money. We all have to get out there. We all have to participate in groups like this one to make sure that the Republicans win elections. Because if we don't, the Democrats will win, and the Democrats have a horrible agenda that is coming up. But at the same time, we are our own best advocates for our positions. Right? You're looking for thought leaders. The thought leader is you. You are the thought leader. Donald Trump is not your thought leader. The character leader is you. Be that person. Be the person who's out there spreading the word on the vote. The fact is, you are convincing, and people in this room are convincing more people to vote than anything that Donald Trump says, because it's your conversations with your peers and colleagues and the money that you give to groups that allow those conversations to happen that actually changes the face of politics. It's not the stupid stuff the media is covering. It turns out most people don't care about that stuff. So, bottom line, should we support one particular party over another particular party? You bet we should support one particular party over the other party. and we can be honest and decent and character-filled while doing it. All it requires is a little bit of backbone and a little bit of ability to suffer some cognitive dissonance. Thanks so much.
All right, I didn't script Ben at all coming in, and he's going to get me in a lot of trouble now.
Sorry about that.
No, good trouble. For those of you who know, we didn't endorse Donald Trump for the same reasons, and we've been some of his biggest advocates since he's been elected. So
we're on the same page here.
In many ways, very sympathetic, and I think you articulated quite well. I have a few questions I'm going to ask. I want to cover a little bit of policy and maybe even ask Ben some things that most people don't normally know, and then if someone does have questions, where's Sarah at? Back there, we'll go back to the audience in just a minute. So let me start with, these are some pre-submitted ones that I screened that I thought were pretty good. What might seem like the elephant in the room. You're widely regarded as one of the most intelligent, fast-talking, as I've just witnessed again, quick-witted, and best political commentators in American political life.
I like this question so far.
You're pro-life, unapologetically so, intellectually curious, and serious about your faith. In fact, when I told a friend back in Chicago today that I would be spending the evening with Ben Shapiro, he said, "I love Ben Shapiro. He's my favorite honorary Catholic."
I appreciate that. That's nice.
So my question is this: what do you think about the Catholic Church?
So I think that, let me put it this way, I think that the Catholic Church, particularly in the United States, is different than European Catholicism. So just the history of the Jews with the Catholic Church has been rather checkered, to say the least. But American Catholics are an incredible bulwark against the forces of the left, particularly now. And globally, Catholicism obviously is a bulwark against the secularism that is sucking the meaning and purpose out of a lot of people's lives right now. So, I mean, to be completely honest with you, is the current Pope my favorite Pope? No. I like Benedict better, I like John Paul II better. But you know, I get to say this stuff because I'm outside the church, I can say whatever I want. But on a global level, the importance of the church in pushing values that are eternal and meaningful, I think, can't be overestimated. I think it has tremendous impact, and it's one of the few forces left on planet Earth that's actually fighting for some worthwhile causes.
This is a related question, and it was submitted by someone in this room. How can we better promote meaningful alliances between the three major Old Testament religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, to find common ground that we can focus on to help drive progress on our common goals, like religious freedom, the right to life, sanctity of marriage, etc., given the rise in threats of atheistic globalist forces?
So I think that the Jewish-Christian alliance is strengthening right now. I mean, I think that if you ask most observant Jews who spend any time with Christians, then you'll see that there's a lot of warmth in the Orthodox community. So the first thing to do is to recognize the gradations in both the Christian community and the Jewish community. Just because someone's Jewish doesn't mean they're actually Orthodox or they take Judaism seriously. The vast majority of Jews do not take Judaism seriously. The vast majority of Jews are secular leftists who don't believe in God and keep Yom Kippur until lunch, which might be great for lunch. So to count them as sort of representatives of Judaism and then look for an alliance there, I think they're looking in the wrong place. They're secular leftists from New York and California. But among Jews and Christians, that alliance building, and I think that's pretty obvious. I mean, I would say not most. I'd say virtually all of my best friends are religious Christians. My business partner is lay pastor. And we talk religion on the South, religion and philosophy. I think that alliance building. As far as Islam, the question is Islam can moderate itself enough to be part of the conversation? So that's not going to be up to us, right? That's going to be up to whether moderates and reformers in Islam are able to move beyond the tolerance of radical Islam that seems to predominate so much of the Muslim world. And if that happens, then everybody's welcome to the table because we do share, while there's a fair bit of disagreement on very important issues, and I would say there's more disagreement, at least in the modern era, between Jews and Christians on the one hand and Muslims on the other, when it comes to, particularly when it comes to issues of governance and classical liberalism, when it comes to issues of religious freedom, we obviously should be on the exact same page. And it's a tragedy that other issues seem to have cropped up to prevent that, mainly foreign policy issues in the case of the Muslim community.
Well, certainly in the case of the threats that you outlined, particularly against the Catholic Church, as you suggested, but the threats from the left continue to become as aggressive as they are, particularly when on the autonomy of churches, on the sanctity of the family, on parental rights and education. It would seem to me that there ought to be increasing alliances.
There should be a natural alliance. And one of the big problems as far as the Muslim community being part of that alliance, that right now the left is treating them with a certain amount of sanctity that they're not granting to Jews and Christians. Right? So whenever you see a case about like a baker who's discriminating, it's always a Christian baker. Well, if you walked into a religious Muslim bakery, they would probably give you the exact same treatment. Stephen Crowder, my friend, actually did this. He went to a Muslim bakery in Detroit, and he pretended to be a gay guy, and they refused him service, and no one cared. Because there's the left believes in this intersectional hierarchy where certain groups are given more value than other groups. And right now, because Muslims are seen as victims of Western civilization and American society, they're granted a certain amount of leeway that's not given to Christians or Jews by the left. And so they're benefiting from that. But when the left realizes that Muslims actually believe in a deity, then I think that the left is going to react badly to this news.
As soon as they become political utility expires, then they'll try to do. So, moving on a different area, it's related to some of your comments tonight. You penned a pretty significant piece in the Weekly Standard earlier this month on young people, particularly the disparity between older conservatives and young people, and some of the differences in certainly some of the grim stats that seem to suggest an unprecedented move by young people away from kind of an older model of conservatism. Could you help explain that? And then secondly, related to that, one of the, I think, rejoinders, I think it was Ramesh that wrote, that the problem might not be as much age as it is the difficulty conservatives have in winning over non-whites.
Yeah.
So it's a related question, particularly young people and minorities.
I mean, there's no question that Ramesh is right when it comes to the demographic argument that particular racial groups vote differently than other racial groups. That is not inherent to their race, obviously. And I think one of the things that I've been very encouraged by is people are so sick of the identity politics that you're beginning to see people, free radicals, sort of breaking away from that. That's why the Kanye West thing actually sort of matters. Like, in fact, Kanye actually said, listen, I don't have to do what you guys want me to do just because you say I'm a black guy and I have to mirror all your political preferences. Whatever you think of Kanye West, I am no fan. I think that what he did there is actually kind of an important thing, and breaking that monopoly that the left has on particular racial groups is going to be very, very important. The argument that I made in the Weekly Standard piece was basically twofold. What I said is that the gap between young people and conservatives is one along the lines of Trump that I sort of expressed tonight, which is that older conservatives want to believe that Donald Trump is a good man, and younger people in the United States do not believe he's a good person. They think that he is intolerant and divisive, and they think all of these things. And this holds true for a lot of young conservatives as well. And so the more you say that Donald Trump is a wonderful dude, the more you're alienating young people, which the polls just showed us. Okay, it's not me speculating this. 80% of young Republicans between the ages of 18 and 24 want a Trump primary in 2020. You can't find 8 Americans above the age of 65 on the Republican side of God. 8 Americans, like human beings, who want a primary. But among young people, he's very unpopular. And you have to recognize that truth, whatever you think of President Trump. That's issue one, and that is sort of goes to the character division that I was talking about earlier. Then there is the more nice issue for religious conservatives, and that is that young people tend to be pretty libertarian. So young people are pretty libertarian on same-sex marriage. They're not as libertarian on abortion. They're moving, I think, in an overall pro-life direction because the science is so good now that you can see inside the womb. It's very difficult to say that the cluster of cells are clearly expanding. So on abortion, they're not as libertarian, but same-sex marriage, they're quite libertarian. They're very libertarian on legalization of drugs. They're pretty libertarian on immigration, which, again, I don't think that's so much an issue for a lot of religious people. I think there are a lot of Catholics are more libertarian on immigration. I'm more libertarian on immigration, actually. But I want criminals expelled, I want criminal law expelled, but everybody else who's come here illegally and they're building a life, they're not taking government money, I don't care if they stay anymore. That's fine with me. I think most young people feel that way. When it comes to the same-sex marriage issue, though, this is a real gap between religious conservatives and young people in the United States. You see this as a litmus test. Young people think like Hollywood. So Hollywood, this is the only litmus test. If you're anti-same-sex marriage in Hollywood, you will never work again. It is absolutely that simple. And a lot of young people feel that way. The sign of whether you're tolerant or not is what you think about same-sex marriage. I've been suggesting since before same-sex marriage was made the law of the land by Obergefell. I was suggesting before that the conservatives should completely get the government out of the business of marriage in order to protect themselves. And the reason that I was saying that is as soon as the government said same-sex marriage should be put on the same level as heterosexual marriage, they were going to be beginning to use that as a club against religious institutions in the way that I described earlier. They were going to say same-sex marriage is the same. They're exactly the same. So why is your church discriminating against same-sex couples? There goes your nonprofit status, and there goes your business license. So what I was saying is There's not a religious person in human history who's cared deeply about their secular marriage license. Nobody grows up Catholic thinking, I can't wait for the day I walk down the aisle at City Hall. The same thing is true for Orthodox Jews, right? For me, I have 2 documents. I have my secular marriage document, which I didn't care about at all, and it was like 2 months before my actual marriage, which was in Israel, my religious marriage. And my ketubah is the one that I care about, because that's the one that said I have to move in with my wife and sleep with her and all the good stuff, right? Like the religious ceremony mattered to me, the secular ceremony did not. And I didn't marry her for the tax breaks, because I'm not a jerk, right? Nobody in the religious community was like, oh my God, now my tax break is going away. Am I going to get married? I guess not. The $400 tax rebate was really the reason that I go up, and now I love it. The same thing is sort of having children. Religious people are all, man, the child tax credit, that's a nice thing, you get a little money back. Ooh, the child tax credit. Now I guess I won't have that 6th kid. Right? So what I suggested is we totally get going out of the business of marriage. And then you want to have your liberal church where you go and have your same-sex marriage, as long as it ain't my church. That's your business. You know, I can think what you're doing is a sin, but as long as you're not invading my synagogue, your problem. Your problem. I'll preach to you and I'll make a case for you. And that's what the libertarianism is to say that get the government out of the business of marriage completely, and finally you can go back to the social fight that we all actually want to have, which is convincing people to live more virtuous lives in a religious context.
Well, obviously there's some differences I suspect we have, but I want to go ahead and turn to some of the audience back there before I monopolize entirely. It looks like we have a good crowd, so go ahead.
Hi, I want to talk briefly about a topic that you don't talk about. I've never heard you talk about it. I've followed you for a couple of years.
Is it hockey?
No. Although it could be. It's contraception. It's a topic that's near and dear to everybody in this room because we were all conceived. Does everybody agree to that? By way of introduction, my name is Dr. Mark Murphy. I'm an orthopedic surgeon at the VA San Diego. I operate on about 250 veterans a year. Before that, I spent 22 years on active duty in the United States. So the question is, what does an orthopedic surgeon have to say about contraception, especially one that spent 4 years on a U.S. Navy submarine after an internship, where you go to see as 150 guys and come back as 75 couple. But long before I was an orthopedic surgeon or even went to medical school, I did a PhD in embryology at the University of Arizona. So basically, this is what happens during contraception. This is what happened in your contraception and everybody in this room. Your dad's sperm comes along.
I remember the song.
to your mother's egg, and the acrosome cap of the sperm penetrates the egg. At that moment, since 1971, we've been able to view that under a phase microscope. And there's a bright white light given off called the zona lucida. At that very moment, okay, at that very moment, God creates in that human fertilized embryo an immortal soul that is destined to be with Him for all eternity. Does everybody agree with that? In the case of Jesus Christ, when Mary gave her fiat, the same thing happened. Mary's egg was fertilized by the power of the Holy Spirit. So Mary's...
Doctor, if I could just ask you to ask your question, you have a lot of people behind you, please.
So Mary's...
This is the part of the story they didn't teach us in traditional.
So Mary's conception was holy, as is all conceptions are holy. So this is the question. What is against conception? What is the Latin word that means against conception?
I mean, I assume contraception.
Exactly.
Yes, okay, A for me.
Okay, so you got the answer right. And John I mean, Paul VI predicted that we are exactly where we are today.
I think you have a lot of people that agree with you.
Because of contraception. Okay? And until we get down on our knees and start working against that, in this society, nothing will be reversed.
Amen. I'm going to move real quick to another question. The current social justice in our church, as you know, is very popular. In social justice in political circles today is often a negative term, particularly conservative.
Yeah, social justice is evil.
Right.
It is. It actually is evil. By definition, it's evil. It is.
This is my question. This term social justice actually originated in our church.
Oh, sorry about that.
It originated in our church in the 18th and 19th century by Jesuits who wrote specifically about the obligations of people to care for their fellow human beings, their responsibilities. Interestingly, their focus, however, was not on the state. It was on individuals, families, churches, people living together, what their responsibilities were to each other. It was not the state or coercion that would accomplish social justice.
The term social justice I object, by the way, I'm trying to work.
So that's my question would be, particularly for us Catholics that would like to see social justice properly defined. Can social justice be redeemed?
No. Let me go back to my original statement. The term itself is a huge mistake. The reason it's a huge mistake is because the term justice requires a modifier and a signifier. It requires no addendum. Justice is justice when not to go back to Platonic thought, but justice is justice when you receive what you are owed, essentially. When what you are due is paid to you, right? And when you get what you deserve, basically. And the idea of social justice is the idea that, or at least it's been twisted to mean the idea that you deserve something because you are part of a particular group. I don't buy this in any way. And I think that, okay, but this is the way that it's been taken to mean. And I think that, it's a bizarre term because of that. Like, if the idea is that socialized necessity means communal. If you're talking about communal justice, I don't believe in the concept of communal justice. I believe in the idea of individual justice. Because the idea of communal justice is that, due to my membership in a group, that the only way that communal justice would be different from individual justice is if communal justice were to provide a different outcome than individual justice, which means it would be anti-individual justice, which means injustice in my view. So this is I've long held that even the notion of social justice, at least taken this way, not the way that it was originally meant, which you know better than I do, but the way that it is currently taken, or the way that we understand it in modern English, is a huge mistake. You don't need to change the word justice. Justice is justice. And charity, by the way, is charity. And I don't know why you would call charity social justice. I'll have to go back and read the literature now.
I'll get that to you. All right, we're going to go back to the back again. We'll run a quick roll, 30 seconds, and it has to be a question.
All right, awesome. Well, first off, I gotta say, Ben, I'm a huge fan of your Thug Life memes on YouTube. Way to go, Doug.
It chose me.
It chose you. So my question is, I know you dissuaded Kanye West from going on Alex Jones' show. So my question is, don't you feel like the red pilling of America by Kanye West should supersede your dislike for Alex Jones?
No, because it's not red pilling America that's going on the show of a kook and a prankster and an idiot. So I think that there are things that you can do that are counterproductive in politics. And I think one of the things you can do that's counterproductive is allow yourself to be labeled a like-minded figure with Alex Jones, who's a nut job. Okay, Alex Jones, if I were Kanye West's manager, I would be telling him to appear with a wide variety, not just regular.
Alex has a great audience. He has a huge audience.
Well, he has a huge audience. I'm not trying to call it a great audience, depending on who's in it. And given the amount of the kind of tweets I've been receiving. But, if you're interested, Alex did do an enormous lecture on me saying that Kanye should not go on his show, in which he accused me of being an atheist, which is a new one. I've been called a lot of things, but atheist tends not to come to mind. I don't wear the funny hat because it comes to my bald spot. And proceeded to give me a lecture about how I was apparently perverting Christians. So sorry, guys. And started yelling, "Satan, get behind me!" Yeah, I don't think people should go on his show. I think it's an idiot. I think there are certain things you can do to undermine your own credibility. If Kanye wants to have credibility in intellectual circles or in the circles of anyone who's not a nut job, then I think that the last thing you should do is go on with Alex Jones, who is in fact a nut job.
But if we're talking about cultural warfare,
So this is actually a larger important point. being anti-left does not mean that you have to be, pardon the language, a jackass. So being anti-left means being anti-left. That means fighting smart, it means fighting hard, it means destroying their arguments. Okay? It doesn't mean that anybody who's anti-left is now on your side. Like, Alex Jones has advocated for some pretty insane things. And when he's anti-left, when he does things that are anti-left, I may agree with his argument. So I think that validating Alex Jones's persona and his WWE shtick is worthwhile for anyone, including people in the conservative movement. No, I don't. These are key elements of my disagreement with Milo Yiannopoulos in 2016. Milo was anti-left, he wasn't conservative in any serious way, and I thought that he was shameful how he was legitimating the alt-right, which were a group of people who were actual racists and white supremacists. And he was basically lending them an ear, saying, well, freedom of speech, we're all anti-left, we're all on the same side. I'm not on the same side as Richard Spencer and Jerry Taylor. I can be on different sides from a lot of people. I can think Bernie Sanders is a schmuck, and I sure as hell can think the alt-right are a bunch of schmucks.
Okay, let's get another question.
In the interest of time, and then you can choose which question you want to answer because you've got time is flowing here.
Okay. 3 questions.
So mine is just, I'm a Protestant at a Catholic event listening to a Jew. And we're all conservative for the sanctity of life, the sanctity of marriage, so thank you. But I am here because of a high school student is in love with your conservatism, and so moms just want to thank you for speaking.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
So I just wanted to ask, a lot of people in my school, they talk about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and they use a lot of very hateful rhetoric towards Israel. They say Israel wasn't justified, they're kicking Palestinians off their land. So I just want to know, what is your most effective way to debate that?
Okay, so usually when people try to argue the history, they're trying to not argue the present. So you can argue the history. I think it's kind of radical. The history is pretty simple. No one cared about Jerusalem until the Jews got there. That includes the Christians and Muslims. Okay, the Jews were there first. No one cared about the land of Israel until there was a thing called Judaism in the first place. There's been a continuous Jewish presence in the land of Israel since essentially 1200 BCE, and that has never ceased. There was never an independent state in Israel aside from the Jewish state in Israel. It was part of an empire, the Ottoman Empire. It was part of the British Empire. British Palestine was British Palestine. It was not Arab Palestine. So there's a whole historical argument about what's legit and what's not, but there's no question that Jews have had a continuous presence in the land. There's been a continuous stream of the religion of Judaism, that there would be a reestablishment of a sovereign state in Israel. Okay, so there's the history. The real question that they want to belie is the question of who are the good guys and who are the bad guys now? Okay, because this question is very, very obvious. Okay, this question is very obvious. Israel is a Western-style democracy where Muslims live and Christians live, and everybody lives in peace. It is the freest country in the Middle East for Muslims. And Muslims aren't voting anywhere else in the Middle East. They're voting in Israel. There are Arab parties sitting in Knesset in Israel who actively advocate for the destruction of the state of Israel, and they are allowed to do so. Okay, Israel is a wildly liberal democracy with human rights, and it's now the 26th most prosperous country on earth, which is an amazing thing considering it's been 78 years old. And on the other side of the aisle, you have a bunch of people who legitimately elected a terrorist group. Like Hamas, a terrorist group. I mean, the media coverage this week has been so egregious, it's almost beyond words how horrible media coverage has been this week. Just disgusting. I mean, they are active adjuncts to Hamas propaganda campaign. Hamas was out there saying openly, yeah, we sent a bunch of terrorists at the border, and they were trying to attack the border, they were trying to break through the border, and we sent them there with human shields to try and get people killed. And then it turns out the Israelis didn't kill that many innocent people. There were 62 people killed, 53 of them killed were terrorists. And the Western media is like, none of that is true. It's like, well, but Hamas just said it. Like, no. The Jews are indiscriminately shooting people because they're bad. And I mean, it's insanity. It's insanity. Here's the deal. If the Palestinians wanted their own state, they can have it tomorrow. You know how? Pretend they're guns. And Israel would be a mistake. That would be the end of it. Really. They can have their own state. Israel's been wanting to for a long time. And then they can, Israel wants to govern the Gaza Strip or the Palestinian Authority areas. They don't want to. Israel wants no part of it. If they want to be peaceful, they can do the thing any other state does to be peaceful. They can be peaceful. Same thing is true of the Iran deal. Because, the Iran deal, this is going to make Iran peaceful. If Iran wanted peacefulness, all they would have to do is go up their nuclear program and they would have been integrated into the world economy in 5 minutes. The problem here is extremism on one side. The real conflict is this. One side wants the Jews to die and one side is unwilling to die. That's as simple as this conflict is.
Thank you, Ben, for constantly speaking the truth and bad for all of us, especially out in this world. My question is, for a lot of us, we have conversations on a daily basis with people who would like to have good dialogue, keep things calm. What's your thought, your logic, when you're out there on the videos? You have a maybe more blunt way of speaking to people. What's your logic, coming off to people? I know that maybe we could be a little bit kinder, charitable in these conversations, but in our workplaces, maybe that's a better place to do that.
Yeah.
So, what's your logic in your approach?
So the way that I approach every conversation is, first of all, I have to determine whether the conversation is worthwhile. Because it's a conversation that's going to go anywhere, am I going to learn anything? Are they going to learn anything? Or are we just going to talk at each other, past each other, which is a waste of time, and I don't want all that time back on my deathbed. So you first actually have to assess whether it's worth it, and usually in the first 30 seconds of the conversation, you already know this is worth it or this is not. Then the question is, what tone or tenor the person wants to engage. So what I've said is, if it's a productive conversation, you can have a perfectly cordial conversation. I did a debate with Sam Harris up in San Francisco. Sam is a militant atheist, and we had a 2-hour conversation about free will and religion and determinism and morality, and it's perfectly cordial, it's perfectly nice. And there were times when it got distant, when it was verbally us throwing jabs at each other. But it never got to the point where we were being nasty and mean to each other. It was more him saying, making a nasty jibe about the Bible, and then me saying, that I think he's ignorant of what the Bible actually means. And that's about as far as it went. You have to engage with people who love and want to engage. So when you see me on the videos, quote unquote, destroying people, and it's usually because somebody has decided they want to raise the level. And once they decide to raise the level, then I'm happy to go there. And, I enjoy it. You want to do that? Let's do this thing, man. I've been training for years. Let's make this happen. But I try to be as cordial as possible. But bluntness obviously sometimes cuts through things, and I am blunt in the way I express myself. If somebody makes a dumb argument, particularly publicly, when my goal is not to convince the person I'm talking to, but to convince the audience who's listening, third parties who are listening, then I'm going to try and cut through the crap as fast as I humanly can. And those are the moments that go viral. Somebody says something, I cut through the crap really quickly, and everybody is kind of shocked that somebody said it. That's usually how it goes.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and do the last quick here, rapid fire. So, quick yes or no, quick answers. So, I'm trying to ask some questions you may not be able to see online, or things we can ask Ben since we have him here. So, married?
Yes.
Kids?
Yes, 2.
2 kids. How old?
4 and 2, grown.
Congratulations.
Probably twice what it could be, what it is now. I can actually show pictures of them. Beautiful children, but I will not put pictures of them online because people are.
Predictions this November. Kind of went over it, but
I think Republicans pick up anywhere from 4 to 6 seats in the Senate, and I think, and again, they could narrowly keep the House, they could narrowly lose the House. I don't think it's going to be a nasty like that.
Does Justice Kennedy retire soon?
I wish. I don't see a world where he retires this summer. I think that we're always hopeful that he will, because his rulings seem to come down to whether he has better news level, but I think he's likely to stick around long enough, and the Democrat will have a shot at replacing him because he thinks that his strongest legacy on the court is the gay rights legacy.
I'll challenge that on the record. I can predict Justice Kennedy doesn't retire.
And I hope you're right.
Favorite music or band?
So I'm a classical music acolyte. I was a classically trained violinist up till the age of basically, I studied one of the top 10 teachers in the world. I was a concert violinist. When I first went to college, I actually thought I was going to major in music and genetic science, but that didn't happen.
This is part of that training you talked about.
Yeah, exactly. My dad's a professional pianist, so he still comes over to a grand piano. We start and we'll play drums together, which is really fun. So it's classical music, and the big ones. Like right now I'm on real Brahms kick. So right now Brahms' chamber music is my jam. So that's where I am. In terms of non-classical music, Sinatra, Mel Torme, and then if you go to rock bands, then some of the like Doobie Brothers, I really like. Chicago, I like. But yeah, I'm not sure they've been a band beyond 1982.
That's a safe answer.
Yeah.
Who knows what Twitter would look like tonight? Okay, let's see. Final couple answers. Laurel or Yanni?
So at first I heard Yanni. Then I put my earphones
final question, if you could send a message to Catholic voters everywhere across America today, what would you tell them?
That your religious freedom is in danger. The principles you hold most dear are in serious danger, and if you don't get out and get more engaged than you ever have been before, to do it, but you have a lot of allies, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, we're all in this fight together.
Thank you very much.